Hello, and welcome to this special crossover episode between the One of My Stories podcast and the Fear of God podcast. I'm Lindsay Dunn, the host of One of My Stories, a podcast about the stories shaping me.
And I'm Reed Lackey, one of the co-hosts of the Fear of God podcast, a podcast about faith and fear where every week we explore what scares us in order to find what saves us. Hi, Lindsay. How you doing?
Reed, I'm wondering if we can call you the Lord of the Fog.
I love it. I love it. I will embrace this. And, depending on how my hair looks in the morning, maybe I would resemble that little guy on the stick, little flies swirling around. Sometimes I look in the mirror in the morning and I get quite unnerved by what I see. But either way, I love it. Lord of the Fog. I'm
Or
going to embrace that.
co-lord. Out of all fairness to Nathan, we'd have to make you co-lord
That's
of the
true.
Fog.
Hey, Nathan's not here. I love the guy, but he can be co-lord when he shows up. I love it. Very excited to be here. Thank you for having me,
Yes,
Lindsay.
thank you and for agreeing to collaborate with me. I love
Absolutely.
it. Yes.
I'm excited.
So, listeners, yes, today we are going to be talking about the new Netflix adaptation of the classic novel Lord of the Flies by William Golding. And we are joined by two guests. Ouch! What's that? Did something fall out of the sky, or is that the 30 pages of handwritten notes my next guest tells me she took for this discussion? Returning to One of My Stories podcast after a long hiatus is Anna Gonawan, founder of Rhyme and Reason Coaching. Her tagline for that brand is Coaching Smart People with Feelings. She was last on One of My Stories in August of 2024 to talk about the movie Perfect Days, offering her insights as a life and relationship coach to the main character in that movie. Anna, welcome back.
Hey there, always fun to get to talk to you, so I'm glad I'm back.
I brought Anna back because we are talking about four fascinating characters as well as other things, and I thought it would be appropriate to bring Anna back again.
Welcome, Anna. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thanks for having me on.
And joining us for the first time today, someone who has been on the proverbial island and is finally being reconnected to the society we call podcasting. We saw his smoke signals. It's Aaron Jones, co-host of the currently on hiatus, but hopefully not permanently, the Leech Podcast, a podcast about movies that suck the life out of you, but also stick with you like a leech. Aaron, welcome to One of My Stories.
It's so great to be here. And if there is ever a TV show, a 4-part series that is a leechy show indeed that sucks the life out of you, my God, it would be this Lord of the Flies.
Love it.
So, Aaron, as a first time guest for both me and Reed and Anna, tell us a little bit about you. What's your day job? You can share that if you want. Tell people about the Leech podcast, where people can listen, and also how did you become the Leech expert of the group?
Excellent questions. Let's see here. So I thought this was really interesting you brought me on actually for this episode because William Golding himself was a English teacher, and that's my job as well. He taught adolescent boys for many years, some of whom obviously probably influenced the writing of the very story we're talking about today. So I'm a high school English teacher. I teach all kinds of people, not just boys, but I've been doing that for 13 years. A lot of my fellow podcasters on the Leech, we used to teach together. Now we leech together. And
That's
yes,
awesome.
I became sort of our in-house expert, not just on the metaphor of the leech movie, but on the physical creature of the leech. We would have a segment where we discuss leeches and the environment. I think it's because in my teaching career, I really love the time of the year where I get to teach about Charles Darwin and the influence of his theory of evolution on human society. And whenever I get to teach about Darwin's finches or the armadillos he studied, I don't know, it felt like a pretty natural extension to go for the leech.
Awesome.
Pretty weird, but I love it.
So, is there any hope of it coming back?
There are always rumblings of a season 3. Listeners can find our material on any major platform. We like Spotify the best, I think. But season 3, we have a list of films we'd love to tackle, and we'll just see. It would take a year or two, I think, to get there.
So I'm very curious. This is unscripted interruption, but I'm very curious what from either season, what are a couple of standout episodes? I love the concept. Hit me with a couple of films that you're like, this is a Leech film. I'm very curious.
That's right. We really love the director Paul Thomas Anderson. I really recommend our episodes on There Will Be Blood as well as The Master. We really love
Hmm.
the movie Parasite from a couple years ago.
Oh, yes.
Very lychee film. And maybe an unexpected candidate. Not every film is as lychee as others, and The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Really love that episode as well.
Ooh,
Yes,
okay. All
that
right.
is a
I
lychee
like it.
film. Yeah.
Sticks with you. It takes things out of you.
I dig it. Yeah, I really dig it. Well, we operate almost exclusively, especially we've been doing it for 10 years now. So not as exclusive as we were in the beginning, but we operate primarily in the horror space. And
Mm.
so we're very, very comfortable with leeches and all kinds of, things that just suck the life out of you. And just, I can't believe I watched that. Can't believe I went through that. But then later you're like, I'll watch that again.
Leeches are well loved in the history of medicine. They are somewhat good for you in the right
See,
context.
that's right. That's right.
I have to say, just a little throwback to Darwin and to William Golding here. For 2 years of Golding's university career, he studied natural history before he switched to English. So
Mm.
Mm.
I think he would be really behind the use of wildlife in this film, even in a way that extends beyond his vision for the book, or in the series, I mean.
Okay. Like it. I like it.
Okay, thank you for that, Aaron. Thank you for introducing yourself, letting us know who you are. And yeah, so Lord of the Flies, the show itself. I'm just going to give a couple facts here. The first television adaptation ever first came out on the BBC iPlayer in February of 2026 and then came to us in the States in May of 2026. It was created by Jack Thorne, who's best known as a playwright. He's done screenplays, the Enola Holmes series, The Wonder, and the most recent one, Adolescence, which was a big hit this year. Also a four-part series,
Mhm.
also about boys doing
Mhm.
things, getting into trouble. Directed by Marc Munden. The series stars Winston Sawyers as Ralph, David McKenna as Piggy or Nicky, Ike Talbot as Simon, and most famously, Lox Pratt as Jack, or the new Draco Malfoy for the Harry Potter series. Any other facts about this adaptation people found?
Yeah, the light reading I did about the show was a little bit about the how it was filmed on set in Malaysia, I believe. And I was just fascinated by the experience that it must have been for the young people who were on screen. It sounded like they had a pretty good time from what I read, but I just can't imagine having to be, I mean, they were away from home for several months, these young actors, and then to be asked to do the things they were doing. Sometimes I wouldn't have known how to approach that myself if I were that age.
Yeah, exactly. We were going to talk about high level with the series in a little bit, but let's talk about our history with the source material itself and any adaptations. We have the novel itself, of course. William Golding wrote that. Let's start with that. Then we had the 1963 Peter Brook film. Then we had a 1990 by Harry Hook, that film. And then there is another there is another film that is much less known. So I didn't write much about that one. But Yellow Jackets, that series, is apparently kind of based on Lord of the Flies if Lord of the Flies was a
Mm.
female cast.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I have not watched that show. So I'm wondering what your history is with the novel itself. When did you read it, or have you read it? Have you seen any of these other films, and your thoughts about previous adaptations? So, Aaron, let's start with you, our English teacher.
This is going to be ironic. So, because this book is just kind of in the ether and in the water of kind of the Western canon, somehow it had just sort of like flown past me and I never caught it when I was coming up through school. So I had actually, even as an English teacher, never read the book before. So last week, as I was preparing for this podcast, I thought I have to read it. So I cracked it open, read it cover to cover, and I think it actually really enriched my experience of the show because everything was sort of fresh in my blood as I was sitting there digesting the series. So This is the only adaptation I've seen, and I've only read the book in the last week. So I'm
Okay.
just sort of like, I'm steeped in and living in the material right now.
Wow.
Fascinating. Okay. How about you, Anna?
Well, I will be really honest with all of you. Full disclosure, I absolutely hated this book. Like when I first read
Hey,
it, and
okay.
I read the 1954 novel my freshman year in high school, 1990.
Hmm.
And that same year, my English teacher had us also reading Of Mice and Men, The Good Earth, Atlas Shrugged, Fountainhead, and this one. So I hated it. The only other thing that I had about that is that when I went to college, my college friends and I all had asthma. So we used to joke around with each other about all having asthma.
Sucks
Yeah.
to your
And then I
Sucks
asthma.
read
to
it
your asthma.
again. Yeah, sucks to your asthma. Like whenever one of us would have an asthma attack, the others would say, sucks to your
Jeez.
asthma and tell us to get over it. And so then I read it again last week in preparation for this
Hmm.
podcast, and I still hate it. However, watching this Netflix series confirmed that I still hate the story itself.
Hmm.
But I heartily believe that what I watched had masterful storytelling, incredible writing, amazing cinematography, beautiful visuals, and the acting was superb. So, just the fact that I hate The Lord of the Flies, everything else about it was great.
Would you say, does the story feel like a kind of poison that you're being asked to eat and digest? I mean, what is it that feels hateful about it, you know? That's what it felt to me, a little bit like I was trying to digest something that's just so toxic and so poisonous in a way that might be good for me, but what do you think?
Well, that's really interesting that you say that because when I was reading this, my social environment did feel rather poisonous and toxic. So I felt that
Mm.
there was a hierarchy. And as a child, I had no control within that. And also, given the books that we were reading at the time, it was all about independence, self awareness, not being part of a collective. So, or understanding who you are and what your purpose is. So, in reading Lord of the Flies, and then I just had a really visceral reaction to it. I
Hmm.
also had a visceral reaction to watching this series because
Mm.
as a coach, I am very much about clear communication and setting boundaries and holding space for people and basically not being an asshole. When we have preteens, when we have children and boys, right? There's going to be an element of that wherever you go. So I just, in general, had difficulty with that. Did it poison me? Not necessarily. I'm able to separate my disgust over,
Mm.
just not liking the story from I'm watching something that's really interesting. And these episodes have really interesting things to say about civility, savagery, what it means to be a man, the definition of masculinity, what are expectations of self and others. So I just thought it was fascinating. So I hated it and enjoyed watching it at the same time.
Ah.
Okay.
Yeah. I hated the story and I hated what happened to the boys. And maybe it's
Mhm.
because I identified at when I first read it and still do in a way with Simon
Mhm.
and
Mm.
with Nicholas.
Mhm.
And as I became an adult, a lot with Ralph. I have never been a Jack, but I have
Hmm.
always encountered Jack types
Hmm.
Mhm.
in
Hmm.
school and in work.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Reed, how about you? I bet you have an answer for this.
I do. I've sat with this book for years and years and years. I read it in, I believe, either junior high or high school. I can't remember exactly when I encountered it. I had the polar opposite experience of Anna in that, to me, I already at that age was saturated with an affection for horror and the horrific. And so to me, loving the genre of horror and the structure of horror as I do, I think I was a little bit more braced and suited to be affectionate towards the story. These are the ways I've encountered the story. I've read it I own a copy of the book. I've physically read the book twice to support preparation for this conversation. I watched the miniseries, of course. I did not rewatch the other two films, though I have seen them.
Mm-hmm.
And I listened to the audiobook, which is read by William Golding himself.
Wow.
I listened to him tell me his story through the audiobook version of it, which features maybe 5 to 7 minutes of it before and afterward, where he talked about coming up with the story. For instance, to the Yellow Jackets note, he's passed away now, but he was often asked, why is it a bunch of boys instead of A, a mixed gender group, or B, a bunch of girls? To his answer of the bunch of girls, he said, I wrote about a bunch of boys because I've been a boy. I'm a father. I'm a husband. I cannot as easily get into the feminine mindset as I could the masculine mindset. So that was a primary reason. And I did agree with this one aspect of, he said the reason it is not mixed gendered is because if you have a group of boys and girls and you're talking about a decay of societal structure, at some point sexual dynamics are going to come into play, or to avoid them would feel a bit dishonest. And he didn't want that to be a function to either avoid or directly embrace in the story he was trying to tell. So that's why it ultimately is a bunch of boys on an island. He wanted to paint this picture of society without governing rules and laws, where it truly is this wildlife kind of situation. I want, so I pursue, so I achieve, and that's the end of it. Very briefly about the other adaptations, I am not a very big fan of the 1991. They change a lot of things about the book and about the story. And to my memory of it, again, I didn't rewatch it for this conversation, but to my memory of it, I wasn't very fond of it. Maybe I'm a classicist. I really think the either 50s or 60s, the original adaptation of it is pretty definitive. It captures the major beats of the book. It captures the tone of the book. If you're looking for how to make a successful and effective film while being a faithful adaptation of a novel, I would point to that one. That one's quite strong. This one makes some interesting choices that I will, if we were to pick nits about it, I will demerit it for its faithfulness to the book in many aspects, while also, dishing out some merit towards it for some of the thematic and creative choices that it made. Because I do feel like this fits on the same shelf as Jack Thorne's other work, particularly Adolescence, where I'm like, okay, you're exploring what it's like to be a boy of this age at this time, and the pressures and the influences and the appetites that you have. And building up to my question and silencing my little monologue, Anna, I relate so much to what you said. I have, in my time, in my day, I've been Simon. I feel like I've been Ralph. I feel like I've been Piggy to a certain degree. I have never felt like Jack. I have never wanted what Jack expresses. But you said it so perfectly. I have met, Lord help me, so many Jacks. I have met so many of them in my life and travels. And that builds to my question that I asked to the panel, not just to Anna, is like or dislike the story, do we feel this is true? Or do we feel that this is not really an accurate representation of social dynamics when, sort of unbridled masculinity? I'm very curious. I'm not trying to lead the witness, but do we feel this is a true, or accurate representation?
I actually think that this particular adaptation is sort of interested in your question as well, because I don't think this is a true story unless we know more about the biographies of these children, right? If we're to believe the choices they make, we need to know what are the sort of animating factors of their lives. And Golding in the book intentionally keeps almost all of that out of there. The fact that he introduces for Simon a diary where we get more private thoughts in the adaptation, where we get more scenery from Jack's background, I think the adaptation is interested in, if this were to be a true story, we would need to know this kind of information.
Yeah. That's a thoughtful answer.
I still wanted to share my history with this.
I was just going to ask. I was like, did we hear yours?
It's a pretty intriguing tale, I think. So I was an English major, not an English teacher, but I was an English major, so I had to read a lot of stuff. Didn't read Lord of the Flies in school. I was familiar with it. I knew what it was. I knew that it was one of the most challenged books, but I don't remember ever reading it myself. Then, when I was a senior in college, I did a summer in the UK. It was supposed to be a teacher assistant job that I took at this private boys' school in England.
What?
It was like a boys' boarding school, and
Okay.
the students were from anything from like age 10 to 21. I was younger than some of the students there, and it was a boys' school. I was like, I'm going to go and have a grand time in England and hang out. And they thought I was going to make lesson plans and all this stuff. It was it was bad. I got picked on by these boys really badly.
Wow.
And so as part of this, one of the things that happened is I got tasked with subbing a class one day, and I didn't have any lesson plans. That wasn't why I came. I thought teacher assistant meant I was going to be grading papers or something like that. So I ended up showing some of the kids Lord of the Flies.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And I guess that was a big no-no, but why is it in your video collection then if I can't show this movie?
Right?
I couldn't show the movie. It sounds weird.
I don't know. It was considered inappropriate for these kids, even though it was in the video library in the staff lounge. So
They don't know. They don't know.
Mm,
that's what got me fascinated of the
mm,
Peter Brook version is they took these kids to Puerto Rico to a place called Vieques. It's an island. They didn't really have a script. It was non-professional actors. It was improvised. There was little supervision for the kids. And there was like a journalist that said he was there and he saw like one of the boys feeding live lizards into a fan.
Oh my God.
good
Okay.
Lord.
So I think this is before maybe there were union laws for child actors. I'm not sure, but they were basically left to their own devices. And then there was no follow up with the kids. So there's a documentary called Time Flies that is about that
Mm,
kind of takes all those kids when they were kids they did this, now they're adults, and it films like what was the impact of being in Lord of the Flies.
Wow.
They kept them separated, so Piggy and Ralph were kept separated from the choir boys, the hunters, and so there was they it sort of they were trying to recreate the dynamics of the separate groups. I don't know, it was like horrifying to me that they
hmm
basically left these kids a little bit unsupervised on this island because they wanted to create a realistic dynamic on set. They tell the kids the situation and they just let things kind of play out.
Wow.
Ever since I heard that, I've just been fascinated by
mm,
the fact that people take kids to play these roles. In the
Hmm.
Wow.
1990s, it wasn't like that. It was scripted. The parents saw the script, they saw what was going to happen. There was supervision, and the Netflix documentary, there's also very strong supervision. You can see them working with the kids. They were only allowed
Yeah.
to film them in daylight. There's all these cautions and things they're taking. But back
Mm.
in 1963, this did not exist, and it's considered like a huge example of wonderful filmmaking, but what was the cost of making this series for these
hmm
boys?
I think Aaron mentioned this earlier. It is interesting because sometimes it really depends on the environment of the set.
Mhm.
Because there have been films which you see what the kids go through while they're in the film and you think like, wow, this must have been dreadfully traumatic for them. But then when they talk about it, they're like, "Oh no, we had a lot of fun. Like we cracked a lot of jokes." And then there have been other scenarios, maybe much tamer in terms of the finished product content, where the kids had a much harsher experience, or they got yelled at, or some other kind of thing. So it's really really fascinating. What makes it to the screen is not always necessarily an equivalent to what happened behind the scenes, even if the director and producers tried to manufacture something to organically replicate the dynamics of the story. It's not always going to play out that way to the experience of the child. I'd be very interested to see that documentary.
Okay, so before we go to character breakdown, I did want to leave a little more space for any high level thoughts about the series. We've already kind of talked about that. Differences, what stood out, strengths or weaknesses? Was there anything you didn't like? And these are just your high level thoughts about the series.
Well,
Go ahead, Anna. Mhm.
yeah, I just wanted to finish the thought of, is this accurate to it, is
Mhm.
what we're seeing accurate, right? So
Yeah.
Yeah.
from my perspective, the portrayals are accurate to modern social dynamics, yes, at the level of social mechanisms. So I believe that the series accurately depicts how status and masculinity and group belonging and peer reinforcement shape adolescent and child behavior. Now,
Mm,
the final level of violence, I think, is obviously dramatized. And it is not an inevitable outcome for any group of children, right? But I think that the
right.
adaptation itself consciously develops a contemporary examination of boys. And I remember Jack Thorne describing the characters as complicated boys, struggling with anger, and connected the series to current modern day concerns of boys responding to loneliness and isolation through hateful identities that offer belonging.
Yeah.
So a lot of the racist, classist rhetoric that's going on these days, especially in the United States at the national political level, that's what he was connecting it to. At least that was my interpretation.
Mhm. I agree with what you said, that how it's dramatized, it's exaggerated. But yeah, the dynamics themselves of how boys or just any group of people, things can go from chaos to disorder fairly quickly, depending on who has the most charisma. Like,
Hmm.
Mm,
that's definitely going to be a quality I talk about with Jack, is like he has charisma. He has the ability to make people listen to him, as
Yeah.
opposed to other people that struggle with that.
Right.
But then these charismatic characters sometimes are the ones that get the floor and are able to persuade people to their way, and
Hmm.
that's very dangerous. I saw a reality in that, and also just how people's insecurities fester as in an inability to show weakness and an unwillingness to not let people know when you need help.
There's a fascinating book. I haven't read it in several years, but there's a fascinating book called Raising Cain. I think the full title is like something about the emotional life of boys. I just quickly looked up the writer's name. It was Dr. Kindlin and Dr. Thompson, who were child psychologists. I remember reading this book because I have a son, but I only have the one child. I was deeply invested in wanting to raise a man who would be contrary to so many of the trends that I had seen among some of my peers and among some of the children I went to school with that didn't treat me the way that I wanted people to be treated. So anyway, I read this book, and one of the observations, it's been a number of years, but one of the observations that stood out to me is how I think this has changed dramatically in the past few years, to my observation. I think it has changed. But for many, many years, boys were not verbally permitted to have a complex emotional life. To contrast that, like if a female were to express a wide range of emotions, that might have been validated as a natural or normal part of development. Whereas, to get right to the point, if a boy feels the need to break down and cry, they would often be stifled from doing so, like man up, boys don't cry, something like that. And so, certain ways that boys should have been permitted to express complex emotional experiences were funneled through power dynamics. If you get mad or if you feel emotional about something, then anger is an acceptable way because boys will be boys, right? And I found that fascinating. It's like I said, I think culture has improved upon this, but I still think it's very quick for people to say, like, males can't sob. They tease them for it, and they think that that's somehow not a permitted expression for males to be terribly sad, or they can be quiet and they can stifle it all. That's certainly an acceptable expression, but not overt outward expressions of sadness or even of certain kinds of silly joy are not necessarily as permitted. So anyway, that's just some of my observations about why I think this is one of the things that's going on with these boys is they also didn't have really anybody in their lives, from what we've observed, to be able to create an emotionally complex playground for them in which they could experience a lot of different things. They're just funneled through the same old system.
I will say that I hear what you're saying, and I think that that particular experience of not being able to express emotions is actually also an experience that boys and girls of immigrant parents experience.
Mm.
And it's because I went through that. Both of my
Yeah,
parents
yeah.
experienced the Philippines, like I said, born and raised in Arkansas. I have only sisters, and there was 5 of us girls. And yet none of us were allowed to cry. So if we ever cried or got angry or were sad, we were punished. I'm not trying to call my parents out or anything, but I do think that overall that is an experience that many children of immigrants experience because you're coming to the United States, you are considered excellent or exceptional. And so the expectation is that your children also will be excellent and exceptional. So
Yeah.
the one area in which I did identify with the portrayal of Jack in the Netflix series is when he talked about essentially you cannot be afraid.
Right. Not permitted.
You're not permitted to be afraid, and if you do show fear, it is a shameful thing, and it is something to keep quiet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, he also said you're not allowed to make mistakes. Like with the pilot, he says he made a mistake, he blew it, so he doesn't deserve proper burial.
And Jack is really reactive to the word failure, which Ralph
Yes.
lobbies or sort of throws at him a couple
Mhm.
times.
Sure.
I think as I'm listening to all this, just thinking about who's allowed to express which emotions in which context. It, Golding uses the word conditioning in the book a lot, that these boys have received a certain kind of conditioning. And the language that I would use maybe is the scripts. We're given and handed different scripts, and we're asked to perform depending on our family of origin or whether we're born male, female, etc. Oftentimes we might find ourselves carrying several different scripts in our hands. And one of the things I think this series does so well is it shows these young boys being kind of bewildered by the scripts they've been handed that they didn't
Mhm.
write, but they've been asked to perform.
Sure.
And
Right.
yet they've been thrown onto a new stage where those scripts don't completely work anymore.
Mm.
And so they're having to improvise. And I think that as they're trying to both sort of perform scripts that they've heard before, scripts of civilization and maybe even scripts of stereotype savagery,
Mm.
they come up with this really chaotic performance that they do for one another, right? We
Mhm.
don't perform usually when we're in a room alone. We perform when there's a group. And I think Ralph, for me, is someone who it just doesn't make sense to him why people, and I don't think Piggy gets this either, right? Why can't people just set down their scripts and think level headed about this? Why can't people set aside what they've been told in the past and just like react to the situation now in a calm way? I think the scripts are chaotic. Both the scripts do damage both now and in the series, and Golding is kind of, I think, reflecting on that. The
I
conditioning.
mean, that's a really interesting point because I think of the 4 characters, Simon is the only one who sees that the scripts are scripts. To me, he
Yeah.
is the character
I
I
agree.
think both in the book and also in
Yes.
this series, he is the character who is most capable of stepping outside of these scripts. He understands that Jack is afraid, that the island, what did he say? It's not a test of strength. He understands that in Ralph's leadership, people need care and order, that the supposed external beast, he realizes that it's connected to fear. He realizes what the beast actually is, and that the boys are all acting out roles rather than responding to clear reality.
It looks like we're ready to talk about our characters, so I'm going to officially transition into that. So we're going to do now our character breakdown. So we're going to talk about each of the 4 main characters in episode order: Piggy, Jack, Simon, Ralph. It's okay to mention differences to the book, but please try to focus your comments on the portrayals in this adaptation. What was the character's strengths and weaknesses? What did you find to empathize with and or loathe? And did you like this character portrayal? So we are going to start with Piggy or Nikki. And I'm going to go ahead and lead off this one if you guys don't mind.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So, strengths. He had good ideas. very resourceful, good imagination and dreams. Like he had this idea that they were going to make this boat and do this or that. They're going to make a fire break. He's always coming up with ideas. He has things he finds funny. He likes the Marx Brothers, and he has these songs he can sing to himself to cheer him up. I thought that was a strength because I sing songs to myself and it cheers me up. He's a good storyteller. He has a caretaking gene. He knows that the kids need to be taken care of and he nurtures them. He is organized and knows how to plan things, and he is willing to be led. I think that's a strength. Not everybody can be a leader. Piggy wants to be led, and he recognizes who would be a good leader. He wants to follow Ralph, not Jack. So he has thoughts about who that person should be. For weaknesses, he's unable to communicate effectively with most people. He cannot communicate his thoughts without making others feel dumb or inferior. And again, I'm just talking about this adaptation. I did not see this in the book or other things, but I feel like this Piggy, he really was unable to communicate his disagreement without making somebody else feel inferior. And that did obviously not work well with Jack. He's too reliant on the rules to make things work. I can be this way. You think just because it's the rules that everybody else is going to listen to the rules. That's not how it works. He's too wedded to there being a right way and a wrong way to do things. And he thinks if he just relies on that, uh, everybody else will get in line. He follows rules over principles. He just knows this is the way it's supposed to be. So I think his main tragedy about him, though, is that he's judged mercilessly because of his appearance. If he was fit, didn't have these skin issues we see, he would be more revered. And he does rely on the rules, but maybe because it's the only thing that has ever kept him safe. I imagine he's been picked
Hmm.
on in life before he came to this island,
Most
and
certainly.
he had the adults that would enforce the rules and make sure that he stayed safe. So that's what he relies on for him to stay safe and not to be picked off like Slaughter all the time. So yeah. What else about Piggy or Nikki do we want to say?
I want to leap upon something that you said about the superiority because that did stand out to me. I
Hmm.
feel, yes, anding your identification as a weakness, I do feel that he's one of the more self-aware of the characters that we have, but
Hmm.
also I feel that he thinks he always knows what's best.
Hmm.
And I think it is a detriment to him that he does not interrogate his own perceptions of things, except when he's directly in conflict. Like he will pivot his engagement strategy. Like, for instance, I'm thinking of it the scene when Jack first tries and fails to kill a pig, and he immediately blames it on Piggy. Piggy begins to try to, kind of sauce him a little bit about it and sort of make him feel like put him in his place. But when he realizes that Jack is unhindered from doing physical harm to him, he re-strategizes and he placates and he's like, okay, all right, yeah, that's fine. But I feel like in Piggy's mind, he really often does not interrogate his own impulses enough to properly adapt to the situation he's in. I think that's also a connection back to what you said, Lindsay, about he's very dependent upon the rules and dependent upon everybody agreeing that these are the rules and they will be followed. And so you can't do this and you must do this. How many times? I've got the conch. He's not the only character who says it, but probably says it the most. We agreed with this is what we said we were going to do. And it fails him so many times. So I just think he could have stood a bit of self-interrogation that might have served him a little bit better in these situations.
I think when I watched the series, his name stuck out to me a lot more. At first, you think it's just a commentary on his weight and his figure, his name Piggy. But the more that I watched the series, and in fact, they show this scene where he's like chasing one of the little piglets along one of the pig tracks, and you realize that the series is associating him with the animals of the pig, right? With the pigs in the forest. He has this affinity with the creature that is hunted, with the prey, which is strange because in his mind, right, his survival strategy as prey is to associate with the adult world and to try and, I would say, escape the world of childhood. I think he is hell bent on getting out of this season called childhood, because it has been a cruel and brutal place for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the first things he says to Ralph is, just don't call me by this name they gave me where I came from, because
Yeah.
that place, he was prey. He was
Mhm.
prey back there too. They gave him that name, Pig, right? And so for me, he's just one of the most tragic characters in the show. And the fact that they changed his death in the series,
Yeah.
from the book, it's this much more like immediate, kind of shocking moment. Whereas in the series, it's this drawn out, just brutally sad,
Yeah.
bleeding out. And they really turn the screw on you, because you know that Ralph has lost his mother and that he's haunted by grief, and he has to lose Piggy too, just sort of laying in bed next to him. And he's associated with his mother in bed when she's caring for him. So all of this makes Piggy, for me, probably the most heartbreaking character.
Oh, yeah, certainly.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I was devastated.
And if I could comment for a moment, I don't know if this is appropriate during character dynamics, but to comment on his death, I think it is a distinct choice to make him not die immediately. The death in the book, Piggy's death in the book, is not only much more sudden, it is significantly more violent. Like, just in the verbal description of it, it is the same
Mm,
exact thing happens, but being tactful with my language here, when the rock hits him, he falls and tumbles onto more rocks. And I will spare this panel and the listeners the further descriptions, but the descriptions of what happens to his body when that happens is tremendously more gruesomely violent than what
mhm,
Thorne chose to display for us on this series. I also think that the choice in the series, to a degree, it confronts Ralph's associations and it kind of puts in Ralph's face, this is how things have turned out because of the way you've behaved. I also, to a degree, think, and maybe I'll come around on this through further discussion, but I think to a degree it also lets Ralph off the hook because Piggy active forgives him, which never happens in the book. We don't want to linger too much on the book. Pivoting it back into the series, I thought this recalibration with Piggy's character let Ralph off the hook more than any iteration of the story thus far. It sympathized more with Ralph and with what he was burdened with. But it is deeply tragic. I agree, Aaron. Yeah.
I think that the Netflix adaptation giving Piggy a personal name was very smart, because calling him Nicholas and then having him explain his name's connection to Saint Nicholas created a deliberate contrast between an animal nickname imposed by
Right.
the group versus the human identity he claims for himself. So his explanation links Nicholas with giving, children, and thieves, which fits a boy who gives information and resources and repeatedly protects the little ones, and
Yeah.
tries to
Yeah.
call the group back from taking what is not theirs. So Ralph's eventual use of Nicky as his name marks recognition and intimacy. I think that was a brilliant thing for the adaptation to do.
So glad you said that because that's completely
mhm.
devoid of the book. If listeners don't know, like, he is not given a name other than Piggy in the book. I do agree, Anna. That was such a smart choice and a thematically robust choice. I totally agree. I'm glad you said that.
And I
Yeah,
wanted
and
to add on a little bit to Lindsay's comment about Nicholas not wanting to be a leader. I think it's he didn't want to be chief, but he did want to be seen as a leader. In early on, he asks the group of Biggins, I think it's the core four, are we not co-leaders? Aren't we the co-leaders?
Yeah.
Aren't we the
Yeah.
core leaders? Core leaders, that's what he says. And so
yeah.
that immediately thought he's always wanted to be a leader. He didn't want to be chief, but he wanted the authority associated with leadership. And I think that he is the voice of reason. And Ralph is the vessel for Nicholas's thoughts, which is supported by the conch and the various planning sequences that he puts forward.
Hmm.
I think in general, he wants is belonging and safety and
Mhm.
respect and security from a coaching perspective. he tries to obtain these things by being useful, by having information, and by organizing things. So the bargain that he puts forward is that
Mm,
if I, Nicholas, become indispensable, the group will have to keep me. So being a
Right.
man ends up being meaning you are informed, you're truthful, you're responsible, you're organized, and you protect people with less power. He's continuously connected to the the little
Oh
ones.
yeah.
And so
Yeah.
for
mhm.
him, I believe what this is saying is that competence carries more weight than anything.
Love it. I think that was so well said. I totally agree.
Yeah.
I think what he doesn't realize, and this is interesting in his name, the Saint Nicholas, is that people are not always grateful for gifts.
Mm,
And it's interesting, this is actually kind of baked into some of the mythology that I'm seeing here, where Piggy doesn't even really want to be, but becomes the sort of fire giver for the group.
yeah.
He he also becomes like a cyclops with the one eye kind of thing. I get a lot of
Sure.
Greek mythology vibes here, and I think of Piggy a little bit as a Prometheus who has this sort of
Mm,
Mm,
technology. He gives fire to man, and what
mhm,
happens is he's punished, not by man, but by the gods. But here, I mean, he is constantly being targeted, punished, and even the gift of fire is stolen from him, taken
right.
from him. The idea of he thinks that giving will be good for him,
mm,
but I think he can't win. He just cannot win. He's born to lose.
Right.
And he will be punished even for giving,
mm,
Right.
and that's the cruelty. I mean, that's the cruelty of childhood, of life.
Mm. It stands out to me this moment in the miniseries that has a kind of a connection to the book, but it's distinct in the miniseries where he's trying to tell Ralph after the group splits off. He's like, you still have to be chief. You have to assert yourself as chief. I didn't write down the language, but he says to him, he's like, if you don't stand in the way, Jack will kill the next thing. And then he says, and the next thing is me. I dinged him for maybe some lack of insight, but that was horrifically insightful that he was aware that dynamic was in play. He had clearly experienced it in other more civilized settings. He had clearly experienced tamer and more higher minded versions of exactly what he knew would happen in the physical if not protected. But Piggy has my heart. He does.
Yeah, this has, to me, it has Freud written all over it. In Freud's book, Civilization and Its Discontents, he talks about
mm,
people being so unhappy because civilization is constantly forcing them to like repress the sort of wild things they want to do. And Piggy is used to the more like refined, repressed manifestations of that cruelty and violence back home. It's still there. And this is Freud's whole point, right? Is that civilization is wild and civilization is dangerous, but we have carefully sort of compressed it to where not as many people have to die,
mm,
but everyone's going to have to suffer. And now that all the covers come off, Piggy knows what those forces will do. He is a student, he is a scholar of those forces because he's learned from experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say, like, listening to you, Aaron, talking about the Prometheus and the different things we could say they represent. I will say, like, for this series, for me, one of the things I kind of like about it is I think it is possible to break down these characters and say what they represent. Because I was even doing that last night. I was like, you know, Jack is anarchy and Ralph is democracy, and making this kind of argument. But I think one of the things I do like is they do flesh these characters out and make them less symbols and more fully fledged characters. So I do like it's possible to still talk about what they represent at the same time that these four, they've made them a little more well-rounded than maybe the books did. We're going to get to it, but like Simon was always a Christ figure in the book, and he's always seen that way. And I think
Mhm.
that's less overt, that there's still some spirituality about him, some mysticism,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
there's more to him than that. And I
Yeah.
like how it's more rounded than that too.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So
I think
Mm-hmm.
Nicholas is clear. I mean, he is not a one-dimensional character.
yeah.
He is not just the voice of reason. He
Yeah.
also, I mean, he has flaws.
Yeah.
right? He's provocative. He speaks out of turn.
Hmm.
He can be blunt. He's highly corrective. When he is under threat, he goes from speaking to retreating or submitting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, he's at the end of the day, he's an outspoken, really smart kid
Yeah.
who just wants to belong and wants to be accepted.
Hmm.
Yeah. Accepted and respected. Absolutely agree.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're gonna move on to Jack, if that's all right.
Mm.
Certainly. I'll take the plunge. So I think Jack is clearly a man with something to prove and terrified of his own insecurities. And he leans, even by his introduction, into his existing accomplishments. I'm the head of the choir. I can sing the high notes. I like my talents present me as clearly the one most capable. And he has a baked in following. He has people who are already accustomed on this island to seeing him as the head of something. And I think the series does a better job than any iteration I've seen so far of explaining why his impulses tilt the way that they do. I think when Thorne was developing this series, he probably had his eyes on Jack, understanding that people don't, and I want to say this next sentence as respectfully as I can, absent a sort of psychopathic tendency or a mental disorder, people do not automatically lean towards the proclivities that we see in Jack. There's something there that drove them or conditioned or positioned them
Mm.
to be attracted to that kind of power dynamic.
Mhm.
And I think the series took care that in certain, undeniably horrific moments to give Jack some camera attention. They pivoted to him a few times. And it was interesting that it was not, when you read the text of the book, you infer a kind of glee in Jack. But I don't really necessarily see that in this portrayal. Is a lot more. The line that is coming to me is the crazy line from The Dark Knight of the Joker where he says, I'm a dog chasing a car. I wouldn't know what to do if I caught it, and it's instinct and impulse. And I feel like Jack is a dog who caught the car and then suddenly realizes this is what happens when you catch the car. And there's so many times where he sees certain things happen and he's questioning himself. And I feel like this series does a good job of making him a more vulnerable character instead of a pure antagonist. There's a character not among these core four that I will mention when we get to that section of the conversation, where I think they maybe take less care and take less attention, and they become like the surrogate Jack, if you will. I'll get there when we get there. But I think for Jack, I feel like his weakness is that he has always been handed simultaneously expectation and authority. He's been handed it because of his talent, because of his status, because of his position, but he has not been given the care and attention to actually understand how to deploy it effectively, to where he can deploy it to foster wellness, where he can deploy it to foster goodness. Instead, he just has it, and this is what he chooses to do with it. And I know dreadfully too many people in my life who, because they desire to do a thing, that therefore justifies their impulse to want to do a thing. And I think Jack fits into that mold. Again, also, like, he's an interesting contrast to Piggy because he also is not very self-interrogative. He's very instinctual, and his instincts are simply more of a brutish nature to that end. Okay, I've said enough. I'm sure I'll think of more things, but that's my assessment of Jack.
All right. Anna, you want to go next?
Sure. You had mentioned we have no idea if there's mental illness or some sort of personality disorder at play here, but what it is clear, specifically from his episode, is that his father clearly has taught him a performance-based model of worth. Failure threatens his identity rather than just disappointment, right? It is very important to him to keep anything that he's vulnerable about to be kept private. He converts his fear into achievement. He uses success to regulate the shame that he feels. So I think that for him, being a man, and according to his dad, means passing tests, controlling fear.
Yeah.
What did he say to Morris on the plane? He said, turbulence, I wrote it in my notes, turbulence is nothing to be frightened of. And it's important to him to produce visible results. He has to provide materially, and he commands loyalty. So for him, strength is observable and must be recognized by other people. He frames the island as a test that has to be passed before he's rescued. He insists that he does not get scared, he only gets worried. And he treats killing the pig as public proof of his capability. So he clearly wants authority. His weakness really is self-worth, because his self-worth is heavily dependent on performance and recognition, and humiliating others is the way that he controls others. Piggy, for example, and
Yeah.
violence,
Mhm.
humiliation and violence is what he is. But his strengths really are obviously charisma. He's really capable of mobilizing others. He's able to produce food. He's decisive. And there are times when he's able to reassure the frightened boys. So there
Mhm.
are strengths. There are times when he also listens to people. I think there was another time when he told Morris, one of the other boys who was questioning his ability, "Are you sure that's the way that we should go?" And Jack said, "I've seen your grades. I trust you."
Mm.
Hmm.
I remember that clearly. And the look, kudos to the actors, right?
For
But
sure.
there was a visible change in that boy's face when he heard Jack say that. It emboldened him, and it actually bound him tighter to Jack.
hmm
Yeah.
Jack is one of those people, as a teacher, that you have to win over, or there's going to be trouble in the class.
Yeah.
Because it's a person who has a lot of power in the peer group that can be used for enormous good or enormous ill. That's one of those moments where I think the people who made the series want you to see more of what could be with Jack than Golding offers in the book. They want you to see this possibility that Jack
Mhm.
could use the inherent qualities and powers that he has for good, and occasionally does. But more often than not, this goes off the rails because of fill in the blank. I think the key moment for me with Jack that's in the series and not in the book is when it shows us kind of the boys' boarding school where he and Simon are at, where the choir goes to school together. And Jack is sitting back and watching the other kids meet up with their families. And I think that's the crucial moment. For me, that's the key to Jack's character, is that he's someone who does not know love. He feels abandoned, neglected, and unloved. I think what he's actually terrified of is his own inner life. Everything with him is externalized. Anytime something goes wrong, he has to blame someone else. At
Oh,
the
yeah.
beginning, he blames Piggy. At the end, when he and Ralph are having a confrontation, he says, you're the reason that it all went wrong. Because if he looks inside, he's terrified of what he'll see. And so all of his activity, all of his attention has to be directed outwards, which means he has to construct something long before he ever gets to the island. And that's the whole point, right? He has to construct a mask to live behind in order to survive.
I think that his dislike or hatred or rejection of Nicholas began before they were boarding that plane. If you notice in that particular scene, he lingered the longest on Nicholas interacting with his aunt.
Oh, I didn't
How
Mhm.
she
notice.
how she chased after him, how they were hugging each other. It was clearly a genuine and highly affectionate, family-oriented scene. And he was standing there by the plane completely alone.
Yes, I totally misread that. You're right.
And I think that's where that started. So when you mentioned it started, before even coming to the island, I think he targeted Nicholas from the beginning.
When he's watching that happen, his face is totally blank. When the
Impassive.
plane is going down, his face is totally blank. He's masked all the time, so tight.
Mm.
And not for nothing, sorry, Lindsay, and not for nothing, when the adults arrive at the end, his face is
Mm.
totally blank.
Mm-hmm.
When it has all come crashing down, to your point. So he has not been able to shed this mask through the experiences on this island. He still has it at the end when he's returning.
I was also going to recognize at the end too that when the man comes to rescue them, he's again alone. It ends with him also being
Mm.
alone. He watches as everybody else boards the boat and he's the last one to get on. They cut to the credits soon after that, so we didn't get to watch it for too long, but it sort of comes back to that spot. A lot of people have said some of the same stuff, but just, yeah, he's ambitious. I remember he says he's going to be the hunters, they're going to catch the meat, and they are going to keep the fire going. So he's ambitious. He doesn't know how to follow through with that or how to create the plan to get that, but he's ambitious, reaches for the stars. He recognizes when something is a good idea and he knows how to appropriate others' ideas. That may not be exactly a strength, but I thought it was interesting that as charismatic as he doesn't have many original ideas. Most of his ideas are stolen from others. Case in point,
Mm.
sharpening the flint. He sees Simon sharpening the flint, and next thing you know, all the hunters are sharpening flint on rocks.
Mm-hmm.
Putting on the face masks. He starts to do it, but it's Simon that does it the first time for him, for Jack, and
Mm-hmm.
then from there they come up with the way their masks are going to be. Using the palm leaves. He made fun of Piggy for holding up the palm leaves as the group approached to parley. But then at the end, when Piggy and Ralph approach in the last episode, the boys surround them with palm leaves. So
Mm.
he's stealing everybody's ideas and using them. I thought that was fascinating that he makes fun of these things. Like, what are you doing? But then next thing you know, he's using these ideas.
Mhm.
So for weaknesses, unable to admit weakness, unwilling to share power. He does delegate some, like you mentioned, he delegates some jobs to Morris. If they go with, promise to do his bidding, then he gives them a little bit of leash. Views everything as a contest, can't accept responsibility or admit mistakes. And yeah, he learned everything from watching his dad. I do find him a very tragic character, neglected by his parents. No one sees him off at the airport. He's left by himself at break. Remember that movie, The Holdovers?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Everybody's kids got picked up except those four kids. And then at the end, there was only one left whose parents could not be reached. That's Jack. For me, the favorite scene I loved of him, that scene where he's climbing the mountain. I found that fascinating when he gets stuck, just can't move, and he needs Morris to coach him down. But he's just an absolute weakling there. I've been stuck like that before, and I remember what it was like. And all of a sudden, Morris is right there and he has his foot, and he's just like, just step right here. This is a good step. And there's this dependence on this person. I was in a situation where I was on like a climbing wall and I got up so far I could not get any farther. And the guy had to just say, put your foot here, and guide me down. And then the rest of the week, every time I saw that guy, I would just have a big smile on my face because I felt like he was my protector. That guy helped me
Mm.
down and I was able to trust him. But Jack never got the joy of needing someone to help you. That can make for a very strong and trusting relationship. But instead, he ended up using it as a power dynamic. Like, don't tell anybody about this because they won't understand.
Mm.
So I thought that was a really powerful scene for me and really helped me be sort of a Jack fan. I was like, I want to like you. There's the scene too when he fails at keeping the fire going and he's running down the mountain. I'm going to start my own island, and he's just sobbing, and you feel actually bad for him. But then, it all goes away when you see how cruel he is to everybody
Mhm.
else.
Mm.
I think another way to reframe that line where he says, "Don't tell anyone, they won't understand." No, Jack, you're the one who doesn't understand.
Right.
You don't
Mm.
understand what you're feeling. You can't do the math of like, I can be strong and I can experience moments of like weakness and fear, and I can still be an integrated person.
Sure.
He doesn't understand.
Yeah.
And that's part of the tragedy, is he thinks he can only be one thing.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah. Where are the parents?
Well, and I think that speaks to the lack of maturity. I think that's the one thing that is present in all of these boys is they are simply not emotionally mature enough to handle the complexity of their situation and of what they're feeling and experiencing in their situation, which I think this miniseries does generate more sympathy than other
Mhm.
adaptations do. I think it's more keenly aware of the fact that these are immature boys, and they're not going to have a landscape. They're not going to have experience on their own without a guide to know how to cope with these kind of things. There's nobody there, to your point, Aaron, there's nobody on that island who is capable. The one who maybe is the closest might be Simon, who is capable of speaking into Jack in the way that you just said, like to be able to say, like, buddy, like, you don't understand all of these kind of things. There's nobody that he would listen to. Anyway, okay, I know we need to move on.
So let's move on to Simon. Aaron, Anna, who wants to start off?
Can I just start off with a question? Why does Simon say, when he asks everyone else the question, if you could be anywhere else right now, where would you be? Why does he say, I'd rather be here on the island?
I think the answer is that he's alone and he knows that. He knows he's different. He knows that he's doesn't fit in. And at least on the island, there are places he can wander and go by himself. If you're at a private school, there's probably not that many places where you can maybe go on the ground to the end of the fence where the fence ends. That's as far as you can go. But you're not able to go anywhere. I remember when I was growing up and I had to share a room with my sister, I was like, there was nowhere I could go to be alone. I sometimes went to the basement, the dank basement, to be alone. But eventually, when you're a family of 5 and there's only 3 bedrooms, there's just there's nowhere to go. So I think the island, in a way, it's comfortable for him. It's a wild place and he's able to wander where he will. He doesn't have to be around other people. Sometimes it can be overwhelming to be around other people. So this is a happy place for him.
And it represents a fresh start for him too. Like he has an opportunity to chart a different landscape than the patterns. Now, the tragedy of his character is that he doesn't succeed in doing that. But I think he desires to do that. He desires to chart a new path, a new perception of who he is and what he has to offer. Because he knows back home he's still going to be stuck in this pattern. There's no reinvention of himself back home. That stood out to me a bit.
For me, I think there's an overall acceptance and recognition that Simon is who he is. Everyone keeps calling him Batty, but other than towards the very end, right, when they attack him, other than that, every time they call him Batty, they let him be Batty. There's no punishment for that. Whereas off the island, being Batty, he gets yelled at, he's ostracized. Obviously, he has witnessed his mother being physically abused. Right? He has a difficult relationship with his father, who I think drinks too much. There are serious consequences to him being himself. So off the island, he lies, he hides, he doesn't give information, he tries to misdirect. But on the island, he is directly and obviously himself. And so I think that's why he would be there. He is happiest there.
Yeah. And I think he's the one who most wants to either be, he constantly feels like he's trying to become something else, occasionally something that's not human. It ultimately, in this interpretation in the miniseries, directly leads to his death. He's like moving his body in new ways to try to explore what it's like to not be. And to me, maybe this is reading into it, and maybe it says more about myself than it does about this particular interpretation, but that he's not comfortable in his own skin, and he's constantly trying to break free from that skin and do something that challenges himself. And Anna, I think you make a good point that on the island, he has this opportunity that like he can redefine who Simon is and what Simon does. He can completely holistically reassess that. But I think he's also plagued because of the trauma of his childhood. He's also plagued with probably the sharpest and most keen sense of awareness, not only for himself, but for everything else that's happening on the island. He has the sharpest insights, I think, of any of these 4 characters. He understands. It always bothered me. There's a little 10-second funny story that when we were reading the Lord of the Flies in high school, the day that we came in for it and the teacher gave a test question, he was like, all right, so tell me about Simon. And like 7 people spit out that he's a Christ figure. And he's like, oh, good. So you read the Cliff Notes on the book. I don't know if you actually read the text of the book, but you read the common interpretation. That idea, probably because of my religious framework, the idea of him being a Christ figure has never sat very comfortably with me,
No.
because the only ways that Simon as a character mirrors Christ is a certain degree of insight, and he gets killed. And he's a truth teller as well. Like, that's about it. But Simon, I think, is significantly more interesting as
Mhm.
a person who is grappling with trauma for which he's not to blame and trying to assess who and what he wants to be in this new landscape. And maybe he can get a hold of something that makes people see him differently, particularly that makes Jack see him differently. He wants Jack to view him as a capable person. We also know from his expressed history to Ralph that he and Jack are like best friends as long as the other boys aren't around. And then when the
Mhm.
other boys get around, then Jack discards him like worn out pajamas. And then Simon plays into Jack's power dynamics, and he leverages teasing Simon or, dismissing Simon as a way to continue to curry favor with the rest of the boys. And that's just fascinating to me.
Yeah.
And not for nothing, Simon is confronted by whatever version of mystical presence is saturating the island. This miniseries does not toy with the supernatural except in that scene where the pig is talking to him. The pig head is talking to him.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it's Simon's an interesting character to me. Very interesting.
I think of Simon as the moral center,
Absolutely.
and he's not interested in status. He's interested in preventing harm. I'm certified in trauma and in trauma recovery.
Mm.
So, in watching his episode and then hearing, I guess, the reading of different journal entries from Simon's diary, I think that him witnessing his father's violence towards his mother really explains his hypervigilance, his
Mm.
ability to monitor and observe emotional states, his ability to detect threat instantaneously, his
Mm.
instinct to mediate, and his habit of retreating, like treating his own needs as secondary so that he can take care of others. So he understands aggression from inside a system before he actually encounters it in this group. Ultimately, I think that he wants to understand what's happening. He wants to protect others. And so being a man really means acknowledging fear and protecting others with less power, understanding other people's pain, acting according to conscience. I think for Simon, courage is what a person does when they're afraid. And so he sees himself as
Mm.
frightened and different, even though his behavior is unusually brave. Remember when he put the mud all over his face, crawled into the camp, took his diary back? Because when he
Mhm.
started
Mhm.
doing that, painting his face, I thought, baby, what are you doing? I'm like, are you okay? And then I
Mhm.
said, he's going to get his diary. And I was on the edge of my seat, like watching this whole sequence. And so I think that he believes that fear doesn't make someone morally weak.
Mm.
And he observes that the island is changing them and that the danger is actually emerging from within.
Mhm.
So others expect him to be supportive and non threatening, but they do not treat all of his moral insight with authority. So
Mm.
I think Simon is a really interesting character.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
it was perfectly cast as well. In terms of casting decisions, I thought his was incredible. I just believed every moment of his portrayal of that character. I'm interested in this idea of Simon, who's both emotionally and psychologically been harmed in his life. That he carries a wound, a psychic wound, an internal wound. But he's also someone who has a physical kind of disability where he passes out. I don't know if it's like a seizure disorder or something going on there, but he's an afflicted person.
Hmm.
And I was kind of holding in mind these two contrasting ideas of, the cliche phrase that hurt people hurt people. And I think Jack
Mm.
is that person, right? He's hurt, and so he hurts others. But I think Simon is someone who, because of his affliction, that becomes like his superpower for wanting to be a healer and wanting to be a helper. And for me, he becomes this sort of prophet or oracle, right?
Mm.
Who sees beyond the layers, who sees beyond the surface to how it is.
Mm.
And he's not a prophet. And in fact, maybe this is a Christ figure thing where there's that classic line, right, where it says the prophet will always be like rejected in his
Mhm.
hometown
Mm.
or like stoned by those, right, who should most be listening to him. And one of the things the pighead, the Lord of the Flies, says to him is like, you couldn't get them to listen to you,
Yeah.
which is interesting. He has the message that they need,
Mm.
that they can't hear, and that he can't
Yeah.
speak in a way that they would. I just went back to the book because the Lord of the Flies, the pighead in the book, says to Simon, doesn't say it in the series, but says to Simon in the book, I'm part of you. I'm part of every single person on this island. And like the corruption, the decay, right? That you see the flies all over the fruit, all over the pig flesh. And it's the same thing inside them, but he can't tell
Mm.
them that that's what he sees. He's tragic to me as a seer and a prophet who can't be heard, who has the truth they all need and can't give it to them.
Yeah.
But even if they could, what would they do?
What
What
would
could
they
they
do with
do
that
with the
truth?
truth? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Mhm.
I think he and Nicholas are very similar to each other.
Absolutely.
Neither of them are, well, both of them are picked on, and neither of them fit the dominant hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
While Nicholas's difference is visible and argumentative and very much in your face, Simon's is quiet. He's emotionally perceptive, and that is threatening because he sees what everyone else doesn't want to know.
And he sees
So,
behind masks, so he can see
yes.
beneath Jack's mask. So what
Mhm.
Jack is
Absolutely.
like inside. And like that's
Mhm.
dangerous.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. I put as his strengths that he tries to connect with everyone. He's kind of piggy. He appreciates his humorous singing. He questions things, doesn't seem dependent on what others think. He seems older than the others, but not in the same way as Piggy. He's one of the few boys who sees Jack for his true self and isn't
Mhm.
afraid to say what he thinks, and he can see people for who they are. His weaknesses are Jack. He genuinely likes Jack, and in this adaptation, it's strongly implied that there's an intimacy between them. It may not be a sexual connection, but it's a desire for closeness. It's hinted in this diary that these two are close. He talks about how when the other boys came, he waited to see if Jack would talk to him, and then when he didn't, he understood and faded back into the background. So he
Mm,
sort of reads the signals from Jack to let him know how close they can be at any one time.
mm,
Mhm.
But I think his main weakness is Jack,
mm,
that he makes the mistake of trying to be too familiar with Jack.
Mm.
Tragedy, he's doomed to die for telling them the truth. He has suffered different kinds of neglect, physical abuse, or emotional abandonment. He doesn't really have one true friend on this island. Even Ralph at one point tells him to hush up. When it's just
Mhm.
Simon, Piggy, and Ralph, they not so kindly make him the odd one out.
Yeah.
Do you guys remember that scene where he
Oh,
yeah.
Yes.
yeah.
decides to have a
Oh, yeah.
voice and he says, "I'd like to hear from Nikki right now."
Mhm.
And that really bothered me because later on, even in the last episode, Ralph says Simon was always batty. And I'm like, what makes him batty? Just because
Right.
he passes out every once in a while, that may be what the choir boys think, but I wasn't sure what Ralph meant by that. What he did, especially in this series, the book is its own thing, but in this
Hmm.
series, what did he do that was so batty? Did you guys
Yeah.
have any sense of that?
Well, the closest sense I got to it was when he was, and I don't know that the boys visually caught any of this, but following his conversation with the pig, he does that dance thing that he does. I think he struggles with expressing himself appropriately. Piggy cannot command the appropriate level of attention, but he has no problem expressing himself. Piggy will express himself. Ralph and Jack, similarly. but Simon really has a struggle with understanding how to express himself. And so I think these things burst out of him in ways that are a bit unconventional to people. And I think children in general have some difficulty with difference. Like if something's a little different and they don't connect to it, they see it present in someone else and then they don't connect to it, I think they're very dismissive of it. And
Hmm.
so if they see something, and I would level that at both boys and girls, but I know it acutely from my own experiences among boys, is just that I think if somebody is a little odd in any degree, they will then label them holistically as odd,
Mm.
as opposed to identifying it as a unique quirk of an otherwise acceptable individual. It's like, oh, no, 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 that guy's weird.
One of the first things I wrote down in my over 30 pages of notes was
Hmm.
Simon is the neurodivergent baddie.
Mm.
Mm, mm,
Like, look at you. Like, I don't know if you are autistic, but clearly there's something going on that makes you different. And that's okay, but the boys don't know how to deal with difference. And I think that's why they call him Batty,
yeah, I
Yeah.
because
agree.
they can sense that he views things in a different way. He's quiet when no one else is. He just slips away. Where did he go? That's a little strange. Passing out is one thing, but it's the quietude, or the even in his episode where it was showing him in, singing with everyone else, but he wasn't paying attention. And the only one who really noticed that he wasn't paying attention was Jack. He was looking
Yeah.
all around.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Kids pick
Yeah.
up on that. And so I think that's why they call him Batty, because he is just observably enough different from them to say something about you is not right.
That
Yeah.
scene bothered me, Anna. The choir thing when he's closing his eyes, singing in the choir. You're not supposed to close your eyes, Simon. You're supposed to watch the director to
Right.
see what the tempo is, especially because they had that long pause where they didn't sing and he had to count the beats. And it's like, you got to open your eyes, boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like,
And I think
someone's not
that's,
paying attention. In my notes, it was something like, there's Simon being his neurodivergent self.
Hmm.
yeah. And
Hmm.
that degree of difference, I think, positions him acutely to be able to see what the other boys can't see about things like the beast. It's so
Hmm.
much more glaringly obvious in any other iteration than in this miniseries. I think this miniseries diluted tremendously the specific connection of not only is this what the beast is, but Simon is fully aware that this is what the beast
Hmm.
is and is trying
Yes.
to
Hmm.
communicate it to the kids. I think Jack Thorne made a choice to make a lot of that subtextual, whereas in other
Mm.
iterations, it's a lot more overt that he's like, no, no, no,
Yeah.
guys, you are freaking out about a parachutist. Like, that's what this is. I loved that scene, by the way. We'll get to that in maybe another section. But I feel like,
Careful.
to your point, I totally agree. I didn't think of it, Anna, but I totally accept and agree with it that I think that's what is an aspect of Simon's character, and it positions him to have a different perspective. And kids are scared of difference, like you said. Kids are scared of different, and they don't know how to handle it. And that's something I didn't think of until you were explaining what you were, Anna. But like Jack and Ralph see things differently, but they understand each other. To a degree, they
Hmm.
understand each other. Same thing true of
Hmm.
Piggy. Like they understand
Hmm.
who these people are. But Simon, it's like I see kids just looking at him like, I don't get you, bud.
Okay, what was weird about that scene is, and I might have my reading may be wrong, but when I saw the scene where he's dancing, the rest of the choir boy, they're wearing those masks, right?
Hmm.
And it
Hmm.
looked to me like he was kind of putting on a mask and almost
Hmm.
like he was imagining what it would be like to be one of the choir boys, to be in that group, because
Hmm.
they're all dancing and having a good time. And to me, he was kind of play acting, being one of that group, being with Jack and being like part of that group. He was sort of, in a way, putting on his own mask and doing a dance, which isn't necessarily contrasting with what you were saying, Reed, but I thought
Yeah.
the boys were dancing. They were dancing around, so he's kind of like, "Let me see what it feels like to dance and to put one of these masks on and be one of the group."
Yeah.
But he was
Hmm.
doing it by himself.
We've all had that. Well, maybe we've all had this experience. There's a distinct experience that I had as a child when my family moved when I was going into eighth grade. So same school friends, same school kids from first through seventh. Then we moved in eighth grade, and now I'm starting over. And one of the things that I picked up at the cafeteria was these kids rag on each other. They tease each other. They make jokes about each other. Sometimes those jokes are a little vulgar, and sometimes those jokes are a little crass. Well, I'm a reasonably smart kid. And so I begin to join in. And I'm doing what in my mind is the same thing all of these other boys are doing. But I said it about that other boy, David, and he cornered me in the lunchroom and began to hit me because of what I'd said to him, doing the same thing that everybody else was doing. But I didn't have permission. I didn't have belonging. I didn't have acceptance. I didn't have runway to do that. And so, even as silly as it may seem to our adult, mature mind, that Simon is just doing what all these other boys are doing is like, you're not permitted to do that. You don't do it like we do it. And you're not doing it for the same reasons we're doing it. So, you can't do it. Why are you trying to be something you're not? And, uh, and I think that's what Simon constantly runs up against is even when he wants to go on the excursion with Jack and he's like, you're going to faint. Jack doesn't embrace it as, okay, come along. Like you'll have skills to contribute. It's like, no, you'll be a burden. You'll be a detriment to this effort. And so I think that's why I resonated a lot with him, but I think it's been brought up a couple of times, but I resonate most distinctly with Simon, even though I'm not aware of any particular neurodivergency. I am very well acquainted with the feeling of I tried a thing to belong and quickly read the room that okay, I do not belong. And so then retreat, reassess, reevaluate, and I've had 45 years skill developing at doing that to where I'm pretty darn good at it now. But as a kid, Lord, it was hard. It was very, very difficult. So that's why I sympathize tremendously with Simon.
I think we need to move on to Ralph, our
Oh
chief.
boy, Ralph. Oh boy, Ralph.
Baby Ralph.
Okay, well, I'll start off. Strengths: kind and strong. He's a protector, not threatened by others. He doesn't mind delegating or asking others for advice. He lets everybody else have a say. He doesn't feel he has to prove himself, and he tries to be fair. Weaknesses: he doesn't see the danger in others' behavior. He's sort of innocent in that way. He tries to kind of toe that line between Piggy and Jack and still giving Jack, well, let's give him, you can be head of the hunters. Yes, you can do this or that. But he says the statement at one point to Piggy, he says, it's just a game. So he doesn't understand when it's too late to reason with someone because even though Piggy wanted his glasses back, Ralph still went in there and kind of said, you stole Piggy's specs. You need to give them back. The fact that he, as the chief of the old camp, came to them and he didn't recognize it was past the point of no return to reason with these guys and led his
Sure.
group in, which did lead to Piggy's death, which is maybe what you were saying before, Reed. You were talking about he lets Ralph off the hook. And I was kind of like, well, what did Ralph do wrong? But I guess maybe you're thinking of that he led him into that situation where he did get hurt.
Also, Ralph defines that Piggy will not be respected because when the boys introduce him, they call him Fatty, and Ralph doesn't say his name's Nicky, or I don't know if he knew Nicky at that point, but he doesn't say, don't call him Fatty. He doesn't say, like, hey, we're not going to use that word. He says, no, 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 his name's Piggy. So, what Piggy has the opportunity to forgive Ralph for in the miniseries that never happens is outing him and betraying that secret that Piggy told him in confidence. And Ralph betrays it right from go. From there, Ralph is very benevolent to Piggy, even respecting him and calling him Nicky multiple times.
Yeah.
So Ralph gives him the respect that Piggy's been seeking, but Piggy was never able to get in with anybody else except the youngins because Ralph just outed him right from go. And so, yeah.
Yeah. There are a few times that Ralph doesn't stick up for Piggy quick enough, Nicky
That's
quick
true.
enough.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But other than that, it was hard for me to find weaknesses in Ralph because I thought, I don't know, like that final episode, the most emotional scene for me in this whole thing is in the last episode when he takes down all the trees and buries his friend. And
Yeah.
like they only show it for a little bit, but you knew he was out there for hours digging that grave with an animal's jawbone. I don't know what he was using to take down trees, but he was out there for hours because he knew that Piggy, how much it meant for him. that there be a proper Christian burial, because it's in that first scene that he takes the pilot down, how much it upset him, and he takes the time to bury him. That was the most emotional scene for me, is watching him bury Nikki at the end.
That is deeply, deeply significant.
Yes.
I think one of the things I would point to as a weakness in Ralph is he doesn't have conviction. Piggy is his conviction. He knows what is right to do, but he has to be affirmed. There's a couple of scenes that stood out to me through the run of the miniseries where when things go wrong, Ralph is listless. Ralph is a bit meandering, physically and, kind of unspeaking. He just sort of wanders the beach, I think a bit lost. He doesn't, assert that same level of conviction. I kept longing for a scene that I knew wasn't going to happen, where Ralph was going to confront Jack and call Jack out for who he actually is. He confronts Jack about different things, but it's a little bit of a power dynamic. They're like two beasts sort of bowing up at each other, and it's going to be more a physical struggle. But Ralph never engages with Jack. He comes close in the final episode, but Ralph never really engages with Jack on that emotional level. Filtering back into my primary thought, I think Ralph's biggest weakness is he lacks conviction. He kind of knows what needs to be done. He's a genuinely good person, but he doesn't have conviction. And if you lack conviction, you often lack courage. And I think he just tries to assert his bravery at times when it's ill-timed and ineffective as a result. Because if he'd had, this is my theory of the case, if he'd had conviction, he might have seen it earlier, preempted it earlier, gotten ahead of it. But instead, he's very reactionary to that regard. And that doesn't make him a bad person. It doesn't even really make him a bad leader, but it seriously dilutes his effectiveness as any version of chief. So, yeah.
I agree with that. He certainly underestimates Jack. To me, that is one of his biggest weaknesses. So
Absolutely true.
piggybacking off of
Yeah.
that. So early Ralph gives the ideas from Nicholas, I think, a social reach, right? But he doesn't reliably protect him. Part of Ralph's arc is that later Ralph recognizes Nicholas as a full person and cares for him regardless of status or reward from the other boys. So, to me, his weaknesses are initially the fact that he depends on approval and that he benefits from Nicholas's thinking without consistently protecting him. He underestimates Jack, and that he takes on responsibility far beyond what any child can actually hold. Yeah, he's genuinely, I believe, at least portrayed as a warm, sweet boy. And that's what I take away from that. He's a warm, sweet boy, just trying to do his best.
He is trying to do his best. I think that's so well put. Yeah. I do think he's consistently trying to do his best. Yeah.
Yeah. Because for him, being a man, I think, means being dependable, accepting responsibility, telling the truth, and protecting people who rely on you. And I think that really comes forward the most when he's no longer recognized as chief. Like, he doesn't have that power, but he still shows up for people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he has a lot of good intentions, and he does not have a lot of tools. Just to go back to this idea of the questions about maturity, I think unlike Piggy, he desperately doesn't want to grow up. He doesn't want to be an adult. He can see that there needs to be a chief, and he can probably see that Jack is kind of terrifying, and it's better for everyone if it's not Jack. So he's that person who's put into this position where if you have any wisdom, any sense of moral goodness, you're going to try and keep it out of Jack's hands for the good of the group. But it's not something he actually wants to do or knows how to do. And I think that it's similar. It's interesting they give us that scene with the police, or is it the Navy person who speaks with Jack outside of the house during his mother's
petty
funeral?
officer.
The officer. Ralph doesn't want to be in the house. He doesn't want to be right there where the hardest thing is. And I deeply believe, actually, that the thing that softens him into the kind of good person that he is that grief. Like grief works on a person, and it gives him a sense of what does mortality mean,
Mm.
right? He can understand the deaths of Simon and Nicholas in ways that no one else can, I think, because he's been right there. He's looked into the black hole.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I suspect that that grief has made him not eager to grow up,
Mm.
right? That there's a certain way that that wound is with him too. And the officer at the funeral says, "Ralph, your father's going to need you," which is asking him to hurry up and become a supporter for an adult,
Yeah.
asking him to grow up too fast. I see this echo in him sort of standing up to be chief in a way that's like, I could stand up and show up for dad, but I don't know how to do that.
Mm.
Yeah.
I see the tragedy for me of Ralph is his just constant sense of helplessness
Mm.
and just doesn't know how to do the thing that
Yeah.
Mm.
he so badly intends to and wants to do.
And the series even calls this out when the adult finally arrives back at the end. He asks, "Who's the boss? Who's the leader?" Ralph looks back at Jack. I feel like more to assess the situation than to defer to him, just to assess, like, is Jack going to try to express that he's boss or whatever? When he realizes that Jack has gone numb, which we already talked about, when he
Mhm.
realizes that, he says, "I'm the boss." And the adult says, "And you don't know how many of you there are? Poor show." Like, poor show. And I think that that directly calls out what you're describing there, Aaron. He presents himself to the next adult he sees as, yeah, I'm in charge. And all the adult can really identify is how poor a job he's done at being in charge.
Which is a tragic commentary on the sort of conditioning and culture that these boys have come out of, right? They brought all of that to the island with them. That level of evaluation and scrutiny, uh, and of course, that would F anybody up.
No,
Right.
absolutely.
I hated that scene. Yeah, it was just like you see this young boy running up, you see these kids in war games, and your immediate job is to critique his leadership skills. Wouldn't you be like,
Yeah.
"Oh my gosh, are you okay?
Right.
Yeah.
How did you
Right.
get
I wanted
here?"
to kick that man.
Yeah.
100%.
Oh, and
100%.
can we just identify the irony of what that man is saying when he's the one who's part of the system and the government that's got the freaking
Absolutely.
world destroyed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
On his
Absolutely.
watch, millions have died. All these kids' parents have died.
Mm.
And he's going to cast that stone?
Mm.
Yeah.
It's a moment of like the most painful irony.
Absolutely. And I feel like we are intended to have the reaction that we have. Once he grasps more of what's happened in the situation, he kind of puts his head down in a bit of shame and just kind of deflects to the next task. Okay, well, let's get everybody on the boat. Because I do think that the series leaves you with this lingering knot in your stomach that just kind of says, yeah, look what we've done to each other. Will anybody, for the love of God, stand up and take some responsibility? And I do feel like the show points to Ralph as the only character we have seen yet who has the opportunity to do so and actually does so. He has the opportunity to take responsibility and does so right at the end. It's a little, but right at the end, he has the opportunity to do so and does so, even in the face of an adult who kind of won't. And I think that commentary is deliberate.
I mean, that comment from that man was the worst. I mean, he was already viewing himself as a failed chief because he could not stop the group's collapse. His idea of leadership is that you should be capable and responsible and that you have obligations. And so when murder occurs, it has to be recognized and punished, or at least called out. The injured and the dead require care. We should be rescued. I should try to repair with my friends. And so to have this adult come up to him and just point out, you are a failure, was the worst. Just absolutely the worst. I was so
Yeah.
mad. Hmm.
I will say my final comment about Ralph is he can really take a beating. I mean, that guy Jack hit him with that conch shell twice
Good Lord.
in the
Mhm.
water.
Yeah.
I thought he was a goner. I was like, he
For
was hit on the head with the conch. He gets up. Then, like, later on, Jack's beating him with his big club, and he gets up and is able to get Piggy. I mean, he's incredibly strong.
Yeah,
Hmm.
very resilient. Yeah,
I was
yeah,
just wondering, why is it that Jack is kicking his butt every time? Because he
Yeah.
is the bigger boy, I think the same height or a little bit taller. How is it that Jack's getting the better of
Mm.
him? Is it just that Jack is scrappier and more
no,
cunning? I don't know.
I think it comes back to hesitation.
Mm,
It might be too self-serving for me to use the word conviction again, but I keeps coming back. Like, a lack of conviction breeds hesitation for every
mm,
decision, even instinctual ones. So he doesn't know how to be in a fight, even though if he had the courage to throw the punch, like, then he would. He gets a couple
Yeah.
of hits in on Jack. I don't think he can really hold his own, and I think he's constantly like second guessing himself, even in a moment like that. And Jack, for all the things we talked about, like when Jack sets his eye upon a course, no, he'll just stubbornly barrel through on that course, even if he is second guessing himself in the moment. He'll still keep going.
If you
mm,
notice too, all of those times when Jack gets the advantage, it's because he's using a weapon. Like,
Also true.
Ralph was just fighting and scuffling like boys do. Jack used the conch shell, which is like the symbol of their society, as a weapon, kind of like,
mm,
the 2001 Space Odyssey. Ralph is just not wanting to use a weapon, but you see him in that second episode. He does it twice. Once when he's trying to get Piggy away, he does take a rock and he knocks Roger on the head so they can get away.
Yeah.
And then
Right.
when at the end he hits Jack with a rock when he's facing him. But I don't think he wanted to use weapons, but he eventually
I
realizes
agree.
I have to if I'm going to survive this.
Yeah, I
mm.
agree. Yeah.
Okay, thank you everyone for sharing your ideas about the characters. This is what I wanted, a hearty discussion about these four. But before we kind of wrap up, we want to have a round robin style. So think about either a secondary character that wasn't discussed that you want to bring up that you think is notable, or something about the production of the show. So that could be the cinematography, the colors, the costumes, the music, or the photography. Something you want to mention about the making of the show. So, Aaron, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah, I'm really interested in some of the production qualities. Maybe my first one will be about music. I thought it was a brilliant move by the creators of the show to focus on choral music in the soundtrack to the series, knowing that a lot of the boys are choir boys and really just leaning into that kind of music, especially when Jack and company make their entrance. They're demonstrating their mastery by singing the Kyrie eleison, the, like, Lord have mercy, that they learned back at school. And then the series ends with this beautiful song, Taverner's Funeral Canticle. Just this like gorgeous piece of choral music. And I thought Chef's Kiss, great choice by the creators of the show to kind of integrate that music with the characters' backgrounds.
That's awesome.
Reed, do you want to go next?
I can. Yeah. I'll start with a secondary character. I mentioned earlier in our conversation a while ago that there was one character I felt like they sort of shunted a lot of the baseline lack of complexity to so that they could make Jack a more nuanced character, and that's Roger.
Mm-hmm.
Roger
Mm,
is a named character in every iteration of this story. Roger is the one who kills Piggy in every iteration of this story. I think that's one of the things they changed in the 91, but that's not important. Like, Roger is
mhm,
responsible for Piggy's death in this, and Roger is one note. Roger is animalistic. He is a little beastly in his intentions, and I found it a little troubling and unsettling that they gave Jack the complexity and then just decided to take the character who commits the more heinous acts. If my memory serves me correctly, Roger is also at the head of the charge when they go for the beast, which turns out to be Simon. So they continually give Roger the more aggressively and consequential moments of violence, but we get no backstory for Roger. He gets no episode. We get no background into what makes him so automatically animalistic, and worst, to tie a bow on he's remorseless.
Mm.
Even where Jack has made choices that he commits to, the show takes the time to show us the shock in his face and the moment where he is hesitating because he realizes something has crossed the pale at this point. Roger gets no such consideration as well. Roger throws the rock at Piggy. When he hits Piggy and the conch shatters, Roger's response is to howl again. And that's, again, back to this beastly thing. The show chose to make him someone who was almost purely animalistic. And in a show that I found to take such deliberate care with its other characters, that disappointed me a bit, if I'm being honest about it. That Roger was just so one note to that end, because I feel like it let Jack off the hook for some choices. It let some of the other characters have the nuance and complexity and generate more sympathy for us because, well, Roger did that. The twins are warning Ralph against Roger because Roger's got a stick sharpened at both ends, you know? But yeah, the Roger thing was an interesting choice to me in an otherwise very thoughtfully constructed series.
Okay. How about you, Anna?
I would like to focus on the little ones as a supporting because for me, I felt that they functioned as a test of every leadership model that the main characters represented.
Hmm.
Piggy and Simon repeatedly notice them. Ralph treats their survival as part of his responsibility. And Jack alternates between mocking them and using their fear to justify his own authority.
Hmm.
The little ones have little status. They have limited practical usefulness, and they have no ability whatsoever to reward or punish a leader. They take resources. They need food, water, shelter, reassurance, supervision. They need protection. Caring for them requires a lot of time and investment, and it's not some dramatic achievement to take care of them. So I think every main character's treatment of them answers a very basic question, which is, does leadership exist to elevate the leader, organize the capable, or protect the people with the least power? And how each of the main characters relate to them tells you a lot about their leadership style. So I was like, shout out to the little ones.
Yeah, that's a great note. Great
Wow,
note.
yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about Morris. I found him interesting. He and Roger are the two boys that are in that climbing scene. Morris is the one that comes up and guides him down. And then later, he is the one that comes up with the strategy of the hunt and how we're going to encircle the pig and make this happen. Later on, he tries to do an arrow. He calls it an arrow to get Ralph at the end. So he's got some military strategy in his head. And he's one of those opportunities. I feel like if we were going to talk about other characters that might have made good leaders, I feel like Morris could have been a good leader, somebody that did have some
Mm.
competence. But again, the thing is, it needs to be anytime you have leadership, it should never be one person who's dictator. You need somebody that is willing to see the skills of other people. And Jack does do that at least once, where he recognizes somebody has an ability that he doesn't have. But you need to be able to get a group of people and recognize skills and nurture people and raise them up and help them to develop their skills, and that's a sign of a good leader. And
Mhm.
that's one way I would answer how a good leader, you help other people reach their full potential. Nobody really did that well in this series, but Morris is one of those people that I thought he could have been an interesting character that had a backstory because, Roger is sort of shown to be a psychopath, but in that moment, he looks scared too, and Morris is helpful and is able to mentally know how to coach somebody. So I thought that showed good leadership, and he would be somebody else that if we were going to have a season 2, they could have a episode about Morris.
Yeah, yeah. I
Wow.
agree. I think that's a great observation.
Okay, round 2. Aaron, we'll just keep going around the same order.
Sounds great. The second thing I wanted to talk about was the depiction of the island and its creatures
Mhm.
in the eye of the camera. And I was really struck by sometimes the way that they did these overhead shots of the ocean kind of washing up kind of against the island. And that the depiction of the water is throughout the series. I'm sure there's a lot of things it represents, but at least one thing it represents is just the erosive impact of day after day of being on this island. The tide just keeps washing away more of the sanity and more of the cooperation of the boys on the island. And I thought, wow, this island is meant to represent a kind of Eden, a kind of fresh start, right, for humanity. And the beast is there, and it's a serpentine beast at first, right? It's like the serpent in the garden. And I was so intrigued that as they're depicting all the plants and the fruit, right? We get the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I was really struck by like trees and fruit imagery shown on the island. But I never saw a serpent on screen,
Mm-hmm.
which I think must have been so intentional because I am
Hmm.
sure, and maybe I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would think that island would be crawling with snakes, right?
Yeah.
So the choice not to show a serpent, I think, is again this commentary on like, where is the beast?
Mm-hmm.
Where is the beast? It's not something you can see. So the depiction of the island, the depiction of the animals, I think it's part of the whole atmosphere and texture of what they're doing in the series, and it really worked for me. I loved it.
Awesome.
Okay, Reed, we're back to you.
One of the things that I wanted to point out is just the sequence that happened at least 2 or 3 times every episode, where they would set up a set of either boys very very close up, or maybe boys in this kind of like glamour shot profile style shots where they're just
Mm,
standing there and they're the only things in frame with a backdrop. They are looking into camera, and I feel like the show was trying to comment on the collective experience that they were all having, because it's very easy with a story like this to zone in on the 4 characters that we've been discussing. The show even tries to highlight that, and that everybody else is just merely a supporting player. And I think the show was trying to present to us visually that no, this is happening to all of them. They're all experiencing this to some degree. But I think it was more effective for me in the very, very early stages of it, especially with so many of the shots of the young ones. Its visual style was very deliberate. It's a bit hypnotic, a bit dreamlike. I love the stark red that would sometimes show up in the landscape of the leaves. I feel like that was really a cool choice. It's both visually interesting and I think thematically significant. I really appreciated that. So, yeah, I just wanted to kind of shout out some of the visual montages that they would present interspersed through each episode. Yeah.
Yeah, and I go ahead with your second thing, please.
Okay. I know we're not talking about themes, but I was intrigued. I went down a rabbit hole for the naming of the plane. And so I'd like to talk about that because so I was looking at the plane and then I thought Corinthian. And I was like, is that from the Bible? And so obviously, as we know, it's the letter and it's basically about how should people deal with different abilities, levels of status, and competing loyalties live as one community. I do believe in that passage. It also argues that members who appear weakest are indispensable and that
mhm.
the mature community requires mutual care rather than dishonor or insisting one's way or anger. And so that maps really closely onto Ralph and Jack, their competing groups, and the treatment of Nicholas. Now, there's also a British reference to the Corinthian spirit of gentlemanly fair play, which would make the name doubly ironic, right? Neither interpretation has been confirmed by the creators, but Corinthian spirit came to describe an ideal of upper class amateur sportsmanship in the United Kingdom. So the ideal emphasized playing for love of the game and behaving honorably and controlling anger. So, in really practical terms, a Corinthian gentleman was expected to follow the rules voluntarily, um, compete without cruelty or cheating, to show restraint when you are stronger than an opponent, to avoid exploiting someone else's weaknesses, and to see self command as an evidence of manhood. So, therefore, being a Corinthian gentleman was class coded. It was presented as elite British men are naturally honorable and disciplined, which goes back to when the adult came onto the island and he said, "You're British boys. I would expect you to have behaved or done differently or been better." So even though historians note that fair play was never exclusively an upper class value. I do believe that naming the plane Corinthian, and then the plane goes down, and the whole, all of these boys devolve for the most part into savagery, is a tale of social identity. So that's what I wanted to talk.
I'm so glad you brought that up. That is really
Mhm.
fascinating.
Wow. Good call, Anna. That's
Love it.
awesome. I love
It's like,
names.
this has to mean something. I just don't think they would just put that there just randomly.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I'm always
yeah.
like every name has to have a reason. Okay. Well, for my last thing, I'm going to kind of cheat. I will not talk about the music because Aaron did already, and how it's choral music that goes into this almost chaotic screaming and crying at the end.
Mhm.
We've talked a little bit about the colors, but I wanted to talk about the colors and the fisheye lenses because I saw several notes about these things that were not positive about the use of these things. Like, why do they have these colors? And why do they have these fisheye lenses? They're just trying to be artsy by doing this.
Mm.
I think that was deliberate.
Yeah,
It wasn't just artsy.
I know.
I don't know if I have, for me, like a reading on why they did it, but I really liked it. And it just, for me, when you use a weird angle that is not normal, it just makes you see the scene in a different way, and so you can interrogate, why did the director do that? With the colors, I think about, they're trying to show this world through the kids' eyes, and
Mm,
if you notice, the colors are progressively more advanced. Like in the first episode, I don't think they really have any of that. In the second episode, there's a small portion in Jack's episode. And then in Simon, of course, when he goes to talk to the pig head, there are those scenes. And then the death of Piggy. I think there were also practical reasons for them to use it because they weren't able to, they couldn't shoot with the kids at nighttime. So they had to apply these colors to make it look like nighttime, but it really worked for me. That as an artistic choice, I just thought it was really breathtaking. The fisheye lenses just made the whole thing appear
mm,
chaotic, if nothing else, and kind of scary,
Mhm.
foreign, distorted. For me, those things worked, even if I don't have a specific reading on why it worked or what the director was using. Yeah.
Yeah, if I may, we've talked a long time, and I
Mhm.
don't want to steal thunder, but if I may, like that visual choice is both exciting and disorienting,
Mhm.
Mhm.
which I would be two words I would use to probably describe, at least initially, the boys' experience is
Yeah.
disorienting and exciting and thrilling. I will make one comment because I also get, as a film critic myself, I also get very frustrated when people glibly dismiss, like, oh, they're just trying to be artsy or whatever. I do think that calling something out for pretension has more weight if you think they're just being pretentious. But most of the time, something deserves the accolade of pretentiousness if it's inconsistent. And this entire landscape, all 4 hours of this, has a disorienting visual style. Rarely is anything cleanly, directly in focus. There are a couple shots, but rarely is something cleanly in focus. Even if some character is directly the center of the moment, the background is blurry.
Mhm.
The entire landscape is consistently disorienting and has shifting focal points. So it directly fits that tone, and that it's cohesive and consistent through the rest of it. Last note I'll make about that, I'll compare it to music since we've talked about the music as well. I heard a wonderful little snippet of a conversation. Not a huge fan, just personally speaking, I'm not a huge fan of Bill Maher. This happened to be a conversation between Bill Maher and Billy Joel, the musical singer. And I forget who Bill Maher was criticizing, but he was criticizing their lyrics. Actually, I think it was the Beatles. He was saying the Beatles made a whole bunch of lyrics that don't mean anything. And Billy Joel, of course, a very accomplished pop star, said, well, you're looking for meaning in the lyrics when maybe the choice is how they sound. Like music is a sonic art form, and the lyrics, how do they sound when compared with the music? And I thought that was such a potent observation, just identifying the observation and saying you think it only means one thing, or that it can only mean one thing or should mean one thing, as opposed to somebody who plays with the craft, somebody who plays with the medium, understanding this is the effect it's going to have on somebody. When they hear that syllable with that combination of sounds, that's the effect it's going to invoke on someone. It doesn't necessarily have to drill down to a specific defined meaning. What effect does it have on us as we're watching that landscape? How are we feeling in our sense of things? I mean, sure, maybe some people felt bored. Okay, God bless you. But like honestly, what kind of reaction does it invoke in us to experience the medium that way? And I think, art and film is a lot more complex, and I think a lot of dismissive critiques like that just kind of are focused on the
I think it was very masterful. The lens distortion and the fisheye, to me, it felt unstable because the whole situation is unstable.
right. Yeah.
The boys are having heightened perceptions. They're
Mhm.
anxious. They're very stressed. I mean, and even the use of color shifts the island away or the experience of the island away. And then us as the audience watching this away from realism and towards a psychological experience. I think it's all intentional. I think it's masterful. And I think it was very well done. And I'm glad they did it. If I were making the film, I would have also made similar choices.
Yeah. It's great.
Yeah.
So boo on whoever says that.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Even
The
at
beast.
that, I was like, even
Yes.
at that last,
Whoa.
the, kill the beast. Okay. I do like even at the last scene when Ralph sees the navigator, the boat looks really far away. And then when it shows it from the pilot's perspective, Ralph is right there. So I was
Oh
like,
yeah.
Mhm.
what's the distance here? And then it looked like they
Mhm.
could fit 2 people in this boat, and he's like, 8 people can fit. And I'm like, what? You're gonna sink
It's like
everybody.
how? Yeah, he's
Yeah.
stacking them on top of each other.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for your time and attention and your thoughtful notes. I can tell everybody put their heart and soul into this discussion. So it's everything I wanted and more. We'd like to give everybody a chance to go around one more time and remind people of where they can find your work. Are you on any socials you want people to follow? Anything special coming up for you? So, Aaron, why don't you say your last words here?
All right. Thanks, Lindsay and Reed, for having me on. I'm Aaron Jones from the Leech Podcast. We don't have new material right now, but please go and check out our first 2 seasons on Spotify or wherever you find your pods, and follow us, the Leech Podcast, on Instagram. Thanks.
Thank you. Anna?
I'm Anna Godowan. I'm founder of Rhyme and Reason Coaching. I work with smart people who are having difficult feelings, especially around their relationships to others and themselves, breakups, disconnections, and difficult decisions at work and at home. So you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Rhyme and Reason Coaching. And my website is rhymeandreasoncoaching.com. My next 4-week guided group called No Contact, Hope, and What to Do Next begins September the 30th. And in October, I will be hosting 3 6-week small group cohorts on the topics of betrayal, reconstruction, boundaries, and conflict patterns.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you, Anna. Reed?
So I have just subscribed to the Leech podcast so that I can catch up on that. That is fantastic. And Anna, I am going to be seeking out more of your work. I am a big believer in everything that you do, so I am very, very grateful that your work is out there. And if you're listening to me as a product of subscribing to one of my stories, then you can find pretty much most of what I do, including film criticism and podcasting, at the Fear of God podcast. So you can visit us, thefearofgodpodcast.com. We have, I think it's not hyperbole to say, a massive back catalog of nearly 500 episodes that you can choose from. Over the past 10 years, my co-host and I, Nathan Rouse, we explore horror through a lens of faith and spirituality. We examine what scares us to find what saves us, is our sort of repeated tagline on the show. And what scares us ventures out into territory beyond horror from time to time. And sometimes we focus exclusively on what saves us. And we'll have an episode about, something like Moana or something like that. So by all means, come and check us out. We hope you'd have a lot of fun if you do. And thank you so much, Lindsay, for allowing us to partner up and do this together. This has been fun.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you,
so much.
Lindsay.
Yes, and I am one of my stories, Lindsay Dunn at one of my stories. That's oneofmystories.com, the number one of my stories.com. Find me on all the socials at one of my stories. My next two big projects will be episode recaps on the 100 Years of Solitude season 2, and the other project is actually, it's already out there, but if you are into Little House on the Prairie, you can find our recaps of the new Little House on the Prairie also on oneofmystories.com. So check that out. So, Aaron, Reed, Anna, thank you so much again for your time and for looking at this series of Lord of the Flies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.